After the awful tragedy at Bondi, the conversation across Australia, it's been about grief and safety and what on earth we do next. But there's another argument that's emerged, a much sharper one. Today, we're going to break down the viewpoint of commentators Paul Murray and Chris Kenny, who believe the entire nation is being distracted from the real issue.
To really get inside their perspective, you have to start right here, with the raw emotion behind it. Paul Murray just sets this incredibly direct, unfiltered tone with this quote. He's insisting that the words we use have to match the sheer violence of the act.
Okay, so how do they actually build their case? Well, it all starts with how they frame the national response to the attack, and this really sets the stage for everything else they're about to claim.
Now, you're going to see the number 15 here. It's important to understand that in their argument, this figure is used to talk about the broader scale of victims from what they see as related acts of violence. It's their way of underscoring the urgency they believe is absolutely required.
And this, right here, brings us to the absolute core of their argument. They are flat out claiming that the national conversation is being deliberately, actively steered away from the real root of the problem.
So, what is this so-called misdirection? Well, this leads us straight to what they call the distraction, that immediate pivot to a debate all about gun laws.
And, this quote from Chris Kenny just gets right to the heart of it. From his point of view, this whole discussion about gun laws isn't just some spontaneous thing. No, he sees it as a deliberate tactic by politicians to dodge a much, much tougher conversation. So you can really see the central conflict they're laying out here. They're presenting two competing narratives. On one side, you've got the debate over gun laws, which they call nothing more than a cynical ploy. And on the other side, there's what they see as the main game, the thing that has to be faced: antisemitism and Islamist extremism.
So that's a pretty huge claim, right? How do they support it? Well, they argue that the Bondi attack isn't just some isolated event. Instead, they place it inside a much larger historical pattern. To build their case, they start connecting the dots. They point to a pattern of attacks they say have deeply impacted Australians. Things like 9/11, the Bali bombings, the Lindt Cafe siege. In their view, the Bondi attack is simply the latest chapter in this ongoing struggle with what they term Islamist extremism. All right, so after laying all that out as the problem, what's their solution? This is where they pivot, and they start calling for a very, very specific kind of leadership and a totally different national response. Yeah, they are really pushing back hard against what they see as a weak response. Instead, they're calling for a leader with, and this is a direct quote, a set of stones and a backbone. Someone capable of calm, controlled rage. That language makes it pretty clear they want a much more forceful and resolute political stance. Their critique then actually turns into a 4-step plan of action. First, you've got to confront extremism openly. No more beating around the bush. Second, engage all communities, and they specifically mention including Muslim communities. Third, get the major political parties on the same page. And finally, step 4, protect and uphold what they define as core Australian values. And it's not just them making this argument. They point to this post from the politician Andrew Hastie, who echoes the exact same point, that the conversation is being cynically switched to gun reform when he believes it should be about immigration and values. And this focus on Australian values, that really brings us to the final piece of their argument, which is where the discussion broadens out to include national identity and immigration policy. So this all leads to a really concrete policy proposal, what they call a values-based immigration system. The idea itself is pretty simple. Anyone who wants to become a citizen must first subscribe to a defined set of Australian values. Now, this part is really interesting, because while they're calling for this big debate on immigration, they are also careful to add some nuance here. They explicitly warn against demonizing all immigrants, highlighting contributions from the Jewish community, and even pointing out that a Syrian immigrant was praised as a hero in the attack. So this all comes together in one final direct call to action from Chris Kenny. He's urging leaders to move beyond what he sees as just symbolic gestures and distracting debates, and to instead attack the core issue. And so this entire viewpoint really boils down to one central question, and it's posed as a direct challenge to the country's leaders and to the public. Are leaders confronting the real threat? It's a provocative question for sure, and we'll leave you to consider it. Thanks for tuning in.